It's Baxy's Musical Podcast.
It's hard to imagine which one is the bigger honor, winning your third Grammy Award or being on Baxy's Musical Podcast for the third time. I'm going to guess that it's probably the Grammy, but I don't want to just jump to conclusions. The fact of the matter is, Cheryl Pawelski has been a guest on this podcast on 3 separate occasions. That's more than any other guest. I've had a few people who have been on here more than once, but nobody's been on here 3 times. And I don't know if that's because most of my other guests have learned their lesson, or if it's because none of them have accomplished what Cheryl has accomplished, but only the stuff that it truly believes in. And then there are times when Cheryl has found herself in the middle of repackaging the definitive collection of a bona fide masterpiece. In particular, she's been involved in the 20th anniversary release of Wilco's landmark 2002 album, Yankee Hotel Foxtrot. This is a record that has been almost universally revered as one of the great recordings of the 21st century. And so with its 20th anniversary, Cheryl Pawelski was handed the job of putting together the super deluxe retrospective of the album with Wilco's Jeff Tweedy, whose legendary backstory is almost as amazing as the record itself. It's an exhaustive collection that was so beautifully put together that Cheryl earned her 3rd Grammy Award, and she deserved it. What makes me most proud of having Cheryl back on the podcast is that I have literally known her since we were both freshmen at Marquette University back in the 80s. We have literally known each other for almost 39 years, and that's why it is always my pleasure to welcome back my very good friend Cheryl Pawelski from Omnivore Recordings on Baxy's Musical Podcast.
Here.
Hey, there you go.
Hello.
How you been?
All right. Oh, I've been in catch-up mode because, when you lose a week and a half to, I like the whole Grammy schmageggy is like a week of things, but I hadn't seen a lot of people for 3 or 4 years. They had the pre-COVID Grammys were in New York, and I had no reason to go.
Right.
Post-COVID Grammys got moved to Vegas. I certainly didn't want to go there. So, and COVID year, I actually won in our living room here in Portland. So it was, besides business meetings for Omnivore and seeing, hundreds of people, it was just, I'm almost slept up again. So how are you doing?
I'm fine. I mean, I'm doing really good. Of course, I'm not winning Grammys, but I'll tell you what, if I had people knocking on my door for meetings, I'd have like a Grammy door knocker. I'd have a suggestion box. Miss Pawelski will see you now. That kind of thing.
No, that's my wife. She's the president. That's how she gets treated. Me, I just sit here in this room and talk to you.
Well, I'm glad you took the time to do it. It's great. It's always great to talk to you. And
it's fun. I like the idea of when I win a Grammy, I get to talk to Bax. That's like a carrot.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Because and I'm sure that's why you're winning them.
That's right. I get to talk to Bax.
Yeah. I don't need to do anything with Wilco or anything of that other thing. Bax is going to be calling me.
I love it.
Before I really get into the Grammys, like I got to ask you a very important question that's been burning a hole in my consciousness for like about a week or two. Did you or did you not make the $150 donation to the Marquette Alumni Fund for a complimentary pair of Marquette sweat socks like everybody else did?
I did not because 2 reasons. 2 reasons. I already have a pair of Marquette socks.
Okay.
And second, I give a different amount at a different time. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. It does make sense. I'm glad to know I was not the only one that turned down that opportunity of a lifetime for Marquette socks. But
Right.
I think that you would find that my alumni donations are scattered at best and remarkably underwhelming.
Yeah. No, I can understand that. Mine were that way for a long time, and when our lives got exceptionally complicated. I started putting all of these things. I have spreadsheets of bills to pay and things. So I just slotted it in, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, and now it's like going to the doctor, right? I'm after this call, I have to schedule my annual physical. I'm like, ugh, so it's just like, that's how I feel about all these things.
Yeah.
It's like, ugh, but I just do it.
Yeah. Well, bring the Grammy to the doctor's office. Maybe they'll get you seen faster because everybody wants to see the Grammy.
So many people are underwhelmed. I'm like, but now I have three, and nobody cares. Anyway,
Anyway,
we digress.
yes. So you were up against 4 other nominees for this Grammy, including one which was long overdue, Blondie box set, which they've been talking about
Yep.
for 15 years at least, putting that thing
Yep.
together. Tell me about that night. I mean, did you feel good going into this, or or do you not even think about your possibilities of winning?
Of course you do. I mean, everybody tries to, you can't not think about, sort of gaming it out in your head. But this year was hard, extraordinarily hard, because I had, my main mastering engineer and dear friend Michael Graves, and my friends at Numero Group, and my friend Steve Rosenthal, they did the Blondie box. And the first two, I it even sounds weird to say, the first two Grammys I won. I won with Mike.
Yeah.
He's my main guy, and now we were against each other, and it was horrible. The first thing when the smoke cleared, and I texted him, I'm like, let's never do this again, because it's like, no matter who won or lost, it just, it was like the little rain cloud came over, because we're like, man. It's like, but this year especially, I didn't know, I didn't feel like there were any front runners. And the category is such a disparate category. We had super early influential West Coast hip hop versus Glenn Gould's Goldberg Variations from 1981, his last recordings, which was an absolutely beautiful set. A career overview of Doc Watson, a Blondie box, and then Wilco, and none of those things make sense together. you know,
Yeah,
so
it's like a real apples and oranges type of category.
yeah, and it's really interdisciplinary, like if you have best jazz ensemble, everything tends to make a little more sense. In our category, it's how good are the liner notes, even though there's a liner note category, how good is the art direction, design, and packaging, even though there is a category, how historic is it, how well researched is it, there's so many things that go into it. It feels like the only baseline thing is how good is the restoration and mastering. So it's a difficult category.
It sounds like it, but on the other hand, you're talking about, an album that is pretty transcendent and is
Yeah.
like almost universally revered to
Yeah.
to the point where many people look at Wilco's Yankee Hotel Foxtrot as being maybe one of the great albums of this century. And I don't think that's hyperbolic. People really truly have elevated this album to that status. As a
Yeah.
fan of that record, tell me about the significance of it to you, because I don't think you can take this kind of project on without really loving this record.
Yeah. That's a really good question. I've been a fan of this band before they were this band. I was a fan of their bands before this band, right? So
Right.
history has caught up to me now. I'm no longer working on stuff that's 50 years old. It's like, oh, I am feeling a little historical now. you know, but with that comes certainly a whole lot of perspective, and everything changed on this record. So besides loving the record and besides being a fan of it in real time, I was already working in the music business when this record came out, right?
Right.
So, but everything in the music business was changing. So you have the change from analog to digital technology. And that played a big role in this record, because there were CDRs that Glenn had, because he joined the band during this time, the drummer,
Hmm.
and they had they comped up stuff for him to probably learn the songs, but they had no recording information on them. They were just CDRs, and there were mini discs, and there were DATs, and there were cassettes, and there was analog tape, and there was digital multi-track. You know, it was like you could really see the arc of analog to digital recording happening here. And so that's one of the things that was changing. The band was changing. Jay left, Ken left, Glenn came in. So you have that all going on. And then working in the business at the time, I knew that they had been dropped by their record label on this record. You know, that Reprise Records said, we don't like this, you know, and Reprise was changing at the time. And then 9/11 happened, and then the whole world changed. So this record to me is this really interesting hinge point in time in every aspect of it, including Jeff's writing. You know, I mean, Jeff and Jay, um, you know, as I said, they'd been in so many bands before all the guys had, but you know, their songwriting was reaching a maturation point where they were really striving and really trying to go beyond just being like a rock band. So yeah, it's a real hinge point in time.
When I got the record, and it was probably a few years after it came out, but at the time, people were talking about its greatness, and
Right.
admittedly, it took me probably 2 or 3 times to get through it to
Yeah.
really start to understand it because it's
Yeah.
it's it's a very experimental album. In some ways it's sparse and very complicated, but it's also it's one of those albums that the only way I can describe it is it's like it gets better over time, not just from song 1 to the end of the album, but it's like one of those rare moments where
Yeah.
with each year, it feels more essential and it feels more
Right.
relevant. And I can't think of any. I'm sure there are albums in which that happens, but there are very,
Mhm.
very few that do. And this happens to be one of them. It's like the first time you hear it, say, "Well, that's nice," and by 3 or 4 times, you're like, "Okay, I'm ready to take a bullet for Jeff Tweedy." It's like one of
Yeah.
those types of maturations that I think people gravitate, and I think that's what made this thing such a remarkable piece of art.
Yeah, I agree. And I think you can see pieces of that writing starting all the way back to being there. You know, Summer Teeth was a little bit of a left turn and just like Uber produced. But I started, you can start getting whiffs of where Yankee's gonna go all the way back to being there. And my favorite artists are continually changing, right? And continually challenging themselves and therefore their audience. And so sometimes it's hard to find an entry point, but, when people talk about records being growers, like if you can find that one entry point into a record, and it could be anything. It could be, what's the weather outside, and the sound of that song just hits you the right way, and then suddenly you're into the record, right? For me, I just feel like, Wilco's one of those artists where every record is like that. You know, I and some of my a lot of my other favorite artists are like that. And I just sort of now anything that any of my favorite artists put out, I just go get and I listen to. And even if I'm like, whatever, I'll go back to it a bunch of times. Same experience you had, right? Where and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, and then you're obsessed.
Yeah.
You know? I think this record did that for a lot of people.
Yeah, I think that that does happen. There've
Yeah.
been a number of times where I listen to something knowing that people find this to be great, and I want
Right.
to find out what that thing is. And I've done that a number of times where it's taken effort to get
Yeah.
into, but
Yeah.
once it hits, it's like it doesn't let go. Like I mean, for me, like a band like The Fall would be a good example.
Yeah.
You either get it or you're never going to
Right.
get it. And
Right.
if you get it, it's like a companion piece for the rest of your life. It's not going away.
Yeah. Or some people, I call it difficult listening hour, right? Or some people talk about, a guy like Richard Thompson, it's sort of like, well, he's an acquired taste. And I'm like, no, you just if you take a bunch of his records and you put them in the car eventually, and just, you're doing something else. You're driving, you're trying not to crash into things. So it's it's not deliberate listening. It's a little bit more of an ambient experience. Eventually you're going to hear that one thing, and then you're in on Richard Thompson for life.
Yeah. Right.
you know
Right.
and you're welcome, and I'm sorry. you know
So I would imagine, as the 20th anniversary of this record comes around, there's got to
yeah,
be a million people that want to be involved in this project, or the idea of this project. They may not know how much they have to go through to get there, but
yeah.
but suddenly it falls into your lap. How how did you get involved in this? Because Jeff Tweedy could have taken this anywhere.
I've been I've been doing their catalog stuff, I think, since they've done catalog stuff. So the first things that I think it was the Alpha Mike Foxtrot sort of B-sides rarities box set, and What's Your 20, they did like kind of a 20th anniversary of the band best. There'd never been just sort of like a general best of overview thing. So I was asked to do those. It's just, if you hang around in this business long enough, you find your people. And some of their people and I had worked together for a long time in other capacities. And so it was just kind of, I don't know if it was deliberate on I mean, it was deliberate to ask me to do those things, but we've just sort of seemed to they keep asking me to do them. So then we did AM and Being in There and Summer Teeth, and then this was next. And people keep asking me, well, are you going to do Ghost next? And I'm like, I don't have the master plan.
Right.
If they call me, I'll be grateful, because I truly love that record, and I know the fans are huge fans of that record. But this one, I was happy to get the call. I was happy that I was sitting still for the better part of 2 years, because I really, it was a large amount of material and listening, and very critical close listening. So the silence of the world during COVID was helpful to me. Um, I mean, I lived inside that record for about 2 years, and almost exclusively, and it was intense.
Well, the enormity of material, like you said, you're going through many different formats to get to
Yeah,
what you finally put into this. It's 11 pieces of vinyl, 80 some odd songs, or
yeah,
remixes, or
unissued.
unissued tracks. I mean, the enormity of this sounds like, what do you choose to put in and what do you choose to leave out? I mean, I have to assume there's stuff that didn't go in.
Oh, there's piles of it, but it's when you're going through sort of the debris of a record. you know, it's the record is one thing, the live show is another thing. We've been remastering everything with Bob Ludwig, so I knew the remaster was going to be with him. The live show, had a certain set of criteria. I always try to find one that's kind of not been bootlegged or circulating too much, and really is a good representation of the band on the tour for that record. Everything else, like I said, there was so many disparate sources that it was hard to. The biggest brain teaser on this one was trying to lay it out chronologically, and it was impossible to do that, because not because the recording sessions were a mess, they happened the way they normally would, but because of all the disruptions in the band, and the stopping and starting of certain mixing processes, there was all this other stuff,
Hmm.
and it was on all different sorts of media, and so I can't trace it all. And in the giant book, we have a conversation with Jim O'Rourke, because he wound up mixing it, and so much changed in the mix that I can't tell you what the bones of some of the songs are from the original recording sessions, because they removed so much and recorded on top of it. In the book, Jeff says it's basically a Wilco record uh with a Loose Fur record made on top of it. And Loose Fur was Glenn, the drummer,
Yeah.
Jeff, and Jim O'Rourke, the producer mixer that they brought in to ultimately mix the record. So and that's one, a lot of fans have written saying, how come you left this out? Like I forgot or something, and I'm like, well, I can't really tell you. And so once I liberated myself from trying to demonstrate the making of this record chronologically, I was able to kind of put it in some loose buckets. And I knew you weren't going to sit down and listen to 8 CDs at once, although, you might because you're like that. But
Yeah, I guess you've
but
known me long enough to know that's true. Yeah, I
but
suppose.
I wanted you to be able to take, disc 4 and take it in the car and have a really good listening experience. So, but yeah, I listened to all the stuff that had been bootlegged and circulated, and I just, there's things that are just kind of redundant mix wise, like, oh, they changed the EQ on the bass. It's like you don't need that track too on here. You really need things that show growth towards the final record in the process.
Yeah. And I think that's
So,
what makes this so fascinating is because you really do hear the differences between, the early parts of their
mhm.
formation to what they finally did. And it's like,
Mhm.
y- you wonder, well, is that the process for everybody? It probably not, but it's like, I mean, it's really fascinating to me that
Yeah,
at the end of it, that this is the product that you have. I mean, you have this album, and I don't want to make this all about Wilco. We'll talk about some other projects that you're into, but the thing that always sticks into in my head is Reprise Records hears this for the very first time,
yeah,
and it's not. I mean, there's no particular hit on the record, but
right.
taken as a whole, how do you drop this band when clearly this is a major artistic statement here? That confounds me how they could have been so off the mark about what they were trying to do.
Yeah, it's a product of the time and what was going on at Warner's at the time. I mean, there was, a shakeup in leadership there, certainly in A&R, and also they were looking for Third Eye Blind. I mean, think back to that era, right?
Yeah.
You're in the late 90s, early 2000s, and so what was on the radio. They were looking for that, and then here comes Wilco with "I'm Trying to Break Your Heart," and the Conet Project. Freaky sounds. And I was like, that's not on the radio. And I'm surprised in some ways. In the day they got compared. This record got compared a lot to Radiohead, and for some reason, when Radiohead plopped down at Parlophone Capital, which is where I was at Capital, nobody was booting them off the label.
Yeah.
And it was maybe not as unstable an environment, in on the business side, but I think they were just looking for different things. There was just different kind of corporate pressures. I love the quote that Jeff said. The guy at Reprise said, "Every time you send this record to us, it's worse." And I'm like, "Oh, that's got to be good. I got to listen to that."
I do want to talk about some of the other things going on in Omnivore because some of these, yeah, we've
Mm,
talked before about what Omnivore really is, and in many ways, it like finds pieces of history and then brings them back into the light again. The one
mhm.
thing that I saw that I listened to the other day, which I thought was absolutely fascinating, was the typewriter tapes with Janis Joplin
Oh
and
yeah,
Jorma Kaukonen. It's like, no, this is from 1964. This is before Jefferson
yeah,
Airplane, before Big Brother and the Holding Company, and you're just hearing the
yeah,
two of them, and it's phenomenal. Tell me
yeah.
about that because I found that to be just jaw dropping.
It's really cool. I was so pleased to be able to work on that. It had long been a tape. It was just the two of them rehearsing, and Yorma's wife was typing in the background, right? So that's why it's called the typewriter tapes. And it had long been a bootleg. I mean, I had probably 3 or 4 different versions of it on cassettes throughout the years. Being the little bootleg tape trader that I was. Um, and it didn't sound great,
Yeah.
and so we had the opportunity to work on it, and it is 2022, 2 last year when we were working on it, and technology has gotten to the point, I mean, you saw Let It Be,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
The technology has gotten to the point now where we could really get into the recording and make it releasable, of releasable quality. And that had a lot to do with not removing the typewriter. Yep, that's part of the ambience of the recording, but maybe taking it back a notch in the room, in the space,
Hmm.
um, so that you can really focus on Yorma's guitar playing and Janice's vocals. And again, the recorder was set next to Yorma, so we had to kind of I kind of look at it as moving the room, audio wise.
Right.
And so, we gave it a shot, and I wouldn't have put it out had I not felt it was completely listenable and releasable and would do her legacy. And he's still with us, and I wanted to make him proud and make sure that we do right by her legacy. And it turned out great.
The things that I got for it from it were, you don't always hear how brilliant of a guitar player he is, like in the Jefferson Airplane stuff, because I mean,
Right.
they're playing band pieces. Here it's
It's
just
an
the two,
ensemble, yeah.
and here it is just the two of them, and it's just like
Yeah.
it's so stripped down and intimate. It's like, wow, that's considering it's 1964. That's, yeah, just remarkable.
And it really demonstrates where their influences are rooted musically,
Yeah,
so it really
definitely.
is it really is a nice early look at from whence they came.
One of the
Yeah.
other things I was really happy about a couple weeks ago, I had a chance to talk to Victor DiLorenzo from
Oh,
the Violent Femmes,
Victor.
and
Yeah.
who, by the way, had nothing but glowing things to say about you. And we talked
I love
about
Victor.
our shared Milwaukee connection.
Yeah.
Them playing at the Oriental and the Downer Theater. I used to live right right off of Downer, so I was
Right.
literally could see the theater down from my apartment window. And we talked about the Night Crickets and that album, which Omnivore was a part of, with him and David Haskins from Bauhaus and Love and
Yeah.
Rockets and Darwin Miners. And I just thought, man, what a great record this is. He was very, very grateful that you guys were willing to work with him on a new project when you're mostly known for re-releases. This was something new, and you don't normally do newer music unless it's something you believe in. And this was one of
Yeah.
those things. Tell me about that.
Yeah. Well, when he sent us the record, myself and my partners really loved it. And when we do new releases, which we do very few of, because we're not necessarily equipped to do it, because we do historical and catalog stuff really is our area of expertise. And it's really hard to even okay, so sometimes we'll release an album by established artists. This one was hard because it wasn't the Violent Femmes, it wasn't Bauhaus, it was Night Crickets, and it's so hard, and so from a marketing perspective, to explain who Night Crickets are. But we decided to take a shot at it, and I think it's an amazing record, and I we're trying everything to figure out how to explain to people what this is and who this is, because I wanted to do great. It's an uphill battle, and
Yeah.
this is why we don't do so much new music, because it's a different sort of marketing story to be told.
I think what's difficult about it is if people are aware of Bauhaus and they're aware and they're
Yeah.
aware of Violent Femmes, it's kind of hard to imagine the two of them melding together until you
Yeah.
realize that what they've done is this is not a project for them. This is a band. In fact, they're already talking about doing a second record, or have
Sure.
started putting together a second record. But
Yeah.
it really does sound like a band that knows exactly what they're doing. And when you're hearing it, you're
Yeah.
like, no, this doesn't sound weird at all. It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. We all thought it was great. I wish, 20,000 other people thought it was great. Let's find them.
Yes, let's get to the bottom of that. The other thing I want to talk to you about, I contacted you last year because I knew Omnivore was releasing a bunch of stuff from Jonathan Richman
Oh, yeah.
and the Modern Lovers. And I thought, well, I've tried to go through many different sources to see if I could book an interview with Jonathan Richman, which he just doesn't want to do interviews, and that's fine. So I contacted Jerry Harrison instead, and we talked about him.
Uh-huh.
that was that was a whole lot more fun. But
Yeah, yeah, another Wisconsin guy.
another Wisconsin guy. But this is stuff that that Jonathan Richman released after he broke up the original Modern Lovers with Jerry and David Robinson and Ernie Brooks. And the guy's career is a very unique and very unusual one.
Mhm.
And I don't want to say it's a difficult catalog, but if you go and listen to that first Modern Lovers record and then you go out and buy some of his other things, it's something
Right.
totally different. Was that a challenge? I mean, it's not that the music is bad. The music is actually kind of fun and it's got a sense of humor, but it's different.
Yeah. Well, the record that we know of as the first record was not really a record,
Right.
right? It was a set of demos. Everything that came after is sort of Jonathan on his way to being Jonathan, right? Which is, as you say, he is a unique individual, and you sign up for the whole thing, right? I mean, the first time I saw him was at Century Hall, probably on the Jonathan Sings tour, and I walked out of that show and I was like, is this guy for real? Like, I'm like, what did I just see? I'm trying to figure this out. And I would go back, I would get, other records. I'm like, I'm not sure if is he putting me on? Like what am I missing? Right. And then I finally just realized I'm not missing anything. I just need to enjoy the little dinosaur or, the song about the insect,
Yep.
you know, and that's what it is. And I've come to really appreciate his perspective, if you will, his way through the world.
Yeah.
It's he's really his own little treasure. And
It's
but is it hard for us? No, he's got a dedicated audience of people who absolutely love him.
it's interesting when you talk to people about Jonathan Richman. They
Hmm.
all say the same thing that they they love his music, but there's always this hesitation. Like, do I want to say everything I'm thinking, or do I just want to say what I think
Yeah,
you want to hear me think? And
yeah,
and again, you're right. The first album is a collection of demos, but damn, what a
yeah.
great collection of demos
Oh, it's
that was.
great. It's great. And I think you just have to go to Jonathan's space and share that with him. And if you do, it's a very rewarding experience.
I no, I think that's accurate.
Hmm.
If you give it the chance to land, it's a lot of fun, and you'll be thinking about abominable snowmen in the market and Martian landings, and you'll be thinking of the whole thing. And it's like, yeah, do you think at one point is this guy pulling my leg? No, this is what he does,
No.
and he does it
And
very well.
and yeah, and live, you're in that zone. He's such a dynamic performer, and it's such a warm experience. The last time, I don't know if it was the last time, it was one of the last times I saw him. It was in LA. Totally off the beaten path kind of venue in Eagle Rock, I think. And we got to the venue kind of early to say hello, and then we're going to go to dinner. And we said hello, and he wasn't talking because he was going to sing that night. So he just nodded and did his communications however he could. And then we went away to dinner, and I'm like, wow, nobody's here. I wonder if it's the venue. It's out of the way. We grabbed a quick bite and came back. It was still kind of empty. Like 5 minutes before the show started, people were out on the street. It was packed,
Yeah,
so there's this audience for him. And you know when it comes to live shows, I love being in those spaces where an audience loves an artist or an art so much that it's just, you're there with all your best friends. You just haven't met them yet. And to me, that's what it feels like being at a Jonathan show. I'm like, oh, I know you. It's like we could be friends. Now, I don't say that to people because that's weird and creepy.
Yeah, but
But
it's true. It's absolutely true.
yeah,
But Omnivore has released I think it's the first 4 albums from 76 to 83
up through Jonathan Sings.
up
Yeah,
through Jonathan Sings.
yeah.
So, good luck trying to find those records until now.
It's been a minute. Yeah,
Yeah.
they were available in Europe for a while, but I just and we did them. We didn't mess around with bonus tracks or anything. We issued them just the way Jonathan intended,
Mhm.
and just to get them back in print so they were available. That was more of like doing the record community like that was a service thing. Right?
Yeah.
Jonathan's got to be in print.
I think another band that kind of falls in that category, and you've also just released another of their records, is NRBQ. You
Oh
guys
yeah.
have just released Tiddlywinks from 1980, I think, 80, 81, somewhere
79,
around there.
80. Yeah. Yeah, yeah,
That's another band that has this cult following, and I know, like, around New England, whenever they play, they get real sizable crowds of
yeah.
real dedicated fans, and it's like one of those bands. It's like, how do people not know them? How is this music so great that's not, it's so enjoyable that's like, yeah, how has this been lost on people?
Yeah. Growing up in the Midwest, I didn't have any context for them, right? Because they
Right.
were very much an East Coast band. Like if I'd grown up, in Philly or something, they probably would have been part of my DNA, right? But the rest of the country, and I think unless you had a certain I think your ears come to a place and your musical sort of education and acumen where you kind of graduate to listening to things in a different way. And then, like we were talking about entry points and things, like the person that gave me my very first vinyl copy of Astral Weeks, well, first copy of Astral Weeks, he's like, you're probably not going to get this yet, but don't give it away. Don't throw it away. Just keep listening.
Yeah.
And he was right. I kept listening and I'm like, nah, nah, nah. And then one day I was like, my head exploded and I was like, oh, and I think like NRBQ is like that, right? They are so musically sophisticated and if but you would think that the joy in their music would reel you in, but it's finding that entry point. And I think, songs like Me and the Boys that were sort of hits and they had a couple of those where those could have been, the gateway for some people. They have such a vast catalog that I just think it might be intimidating to some people, especially if you haven't seen them. Because if you've seen them, you just want to get up and dance and because you're there with all your best friends again,
Yeah.
right?
So I find myself liking those kinds of bands more and more, like the ones.
Yeah,
This there's some kind of weird ownership you have of, this is my band and nobody else's, and I know
yeah,
this band inside and out, and I'm indignant that not enough people know it. But the last thing I want
yeah.
to have happen is have everybody suddenly know it and take it away from me.
Well,
So,
I bet the artists would like that. They get paid.
yeah, I know. But like, that's a band that you can claim that, like
Yeah,
XTC is one of my favorites. That's another band,
yeah,
like, you either know it
yeah.
or you don't. There's a cultish feeling about it. Uh a couple of years ago, I took my daughter to see Sparks in Boston.
Oh yeah.
It's another. I love Sparks, but
Yeah.
it's like, where do you dive into that? It's like,
Sure.
where do you start? Because they're all over the map. But then we go to the show, and it's like, you have a bunch of 70-year-old people just dancing like it's the best day of their
Yeah.
lives, and it was so
Losing their
much,
minds.
and they were losing their minds, and I was too. It's too bad that more people are not more musically explorative. And
Yeah.
they kind of get into a rut. They think, well, I've been listening to Skinner since 1974, and doggone it, I'm going to listen to it till the day I die.
Yeah.
And there's a fear of, or a hesitation of branching out to see what else is out there in the world. So when you hear like an NRBQ, well, where do you want to start? You start with
Mhm.
that one step. And I think,
Right.
I hope that's one of those bands and projects that works for you, because that's a band that definitely deserves a second look by everybody.
Oh, we'll always support them, and they're just, almost everybody we work with are completely lovely humans. I don't want to, I spent 30 years at major labels getting yelled at. So I don't need that anymore. So I'm working with, artists I love, as people, and I love their art. But almost all the bands we've been talking about have a deep bench of records, and I think that can be intimidating to some people. I think that can, you and I are not average listeners,
No,
right?
that's definitely true.
We prioritize music, and so there are people who love movies the way that we love music. And for me, I'll watch a movie and I'll enjoy it or not, and then I will promptly forget it. I mean, I'm like,
Hmm.
actors and actresses can fall out of the sky on top of me. I'll be like, get off of me. I don't know who you are. But I can tell you who the drummer was on the 1957 blah 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 blah.
Right.
Right. And so I think the artists that we're talking about are people that you come to when you really care about music, you prioritize it in your life, and you find your way to these things because it really is great art. And but it might take a minute for an average listener to make that leap, and they probably don't. And that's okay too, I guess.
Yeah.
I mean, I wish we all loved the coolest stuff that you and I love. But
But
music
we're not saying that in a condescending way.
no, I was just gonna say
All that
music
much.
serves different. Right. Music serves different purposes for people,
Yeah.
and so if you like stuff to listen to just work out, like I was at the gym this morning, that's great. That's one thing to listen to a certain kind of music for. That's fabulous. It's not, you and I have different uses for it.
Probably true. So what else?
Yeah.
I mean, what else you guys are you guys working on? I know that there's more Buck Owen stuff.
For Record Store Day, the it's a woman named Victoria Hallman. Think back in your hee-haw viewing as a child, and Victoria Hallman was a hee-haw honey.
Oh, okay.
So in 1981, Buck produced a record by Victoria Hallman, and it never came out. And she never got the tapes, and the tapes didn't exist, with the Buck Owens Foundation. We looked. She got in touch because a collector found the acetate for the record. Think, I want to say it was at a yard sale, I think. So we have restored this,
Wow.
and finally, after all of these years, Victoria's Buck Owens produced record is going to be released on Record Store Day.
Now is she still with us?
She is.
Really?
Yeah, she came out for the mastering session. She brought the acetate, which we freshly transferred, and Mike did his magic to it. He's one of the best restoration guys on the planet. It sounds fabulous. So
That has to be unbelievable for someone who has something that's been lost for years and years to hear it
yeah,
again. And that must have been amazing for
yeah.
her.
Oh, and it was so much fun. She came, and when she was out and we were doing the studio work and stuff, we took her out that night because it was her birthday. So I mean, it was so much fun to hang with her, and she's around, and I can't wait for her to be able to start talking about it, because she's just over the moon that it's coming out. And it would have been another one of those records that would have been lost. And here's a piece of Buck Owens history, and Victoria's here to tell us all about it.
That's awesome. That's
Yeah,
great. Well,
so
listen,
that's
I,
coming.
I know I've eaten up enough of your day. I know you got projects to get to, you got phone calls to make, but I do appreciate you taking the time. And you know what? I mean, the I've talked to other people that we went to school with, and everyone just they're so proud of the way you're just killing it, and everyone's applauding Cheryl Pawelski right now. So
Well,
congratulations.
thank you. I appreciate that. Now the bar has been set high. I have to win another Grammy so I get to come on again. Because I love talking tunes with you.
Hey, anytime. I love it. I love it too. And it's so funny. I did an interview not that long ago with John Rubely, who went to Marquette a couple years, a little bit
Yeah.
younger than us. It went by like in 10 minutes. I mean, we probably
Yeah.
talked for an hour and 10 minutes, but it went by like that. And it was just,
That's awesome.
he's doing great.
Damn. I need to hook up with him.
Yeah, no, he's kind of just like you remember him. But
Yeah.
no, it was a really wonderful conversation I had with the guy, and it was cool. So
Wow, big fun.
yeah. Well, listen, thanks again. We will talk
Thank
soon.
you.
I'm sure there's
You bet.
there's other Grammys coming up, and listen, if it gets to it when you don't win a Grammy for a while, maybe I'll have you back again.
Well, that would be very kind. But I'll do my best to bring one home so we can talk about another project.
Wonderful. Cheryl, thank
All
you.
right.
Have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
Take care.
You too. Take
Bye.
care.
To find out more about the sort of things the Omnivore is releasing, go to their website, omnivorerecordings.com. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, feel free to like it, share it, review it. Tell all your friends about it. You can reach me at bax@rock102.com. I would love to hear what you think. And thanks again for listening to Baxy's Musical Podcast.